guys, welcome back to another episode here at YASHAV, your ministries with Casa de Israel Yara. Like I always say, if you like the content that we have on our channel, like, subscribe. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, put them on the comment section down below. Yes, we're back from Sukkot. We camped 7 days, 8 days, and we rejoice. We had a lot of fun, as you can see, and now we're back to the new biblical cycle, elevating ourselves, getting to know what YASHAV wants from us as creation, right? We understand that he is the creator of everything. So if we follow his will, we follow his blueprint, which is in the book of BERESHIT in the beginning, and we will understand what he wants us to fulfill in our lives. With that being said, let's do the Torah Blessing, and let's get started. Baruch Adonai HaMevorah, Baruch Adonai HaMevorah, Leolam Va'ed. Baruch Ata Adonai, Eloheinu Melech HaOlam, Asher Bahar Banu Mikol Ha'amim Venatan Lanu Et Torato. Baruch Ata Adonai Noten HaTorah. Bless Adonai who is blessed. Bless Adonai who is blessed now and forever. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe, who has chosen us from among the peoples and has given us the Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai, who gives the Torah. Amen. So, like I said, this week's Torah portion and the book that we're starting in this new cycle is BERESHIT, or Genesis. Let's get started. So the book of BERESHIT, Genesis, starts off with creation, the blueprint, the beginning. And this is something that is not ancient to the people in the ancient Near East. They all had mythological stories on how creation came to be and how the gods created everything. Their focus was mainly in chaos and how in the middle of chaos, gods battled for power and to control nature in itself, understanding that these interpretation of gods were subjected to kings and priests. Now, Elohim himself gives the people of Israel and us the creation account of how it happened. And it's very interesting because as other nations focused on the chaos or the afterlife, Elohim destroys that and establishes that he has controlled chaos in the beginning with his spirit. So we're going to understand this, and then we're going to unpack the creation of Elohim and how we are meant to live by the structure in this book in the beginning. Okay, so let's read. So it starts off like this. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim va'et haaretz v'haaretz hayeta tohu vavohu va'toshech al pnei tehon barucha Elohim merahefet al pnei hamayim. In English, it says the following. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep. The Spirit of God was moving over the surface of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw that the light was good. And God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light and the darkness, he called it night. And there was evening, and there was morning, and there was one day. Then God said, "Let there be an expansion in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." And God made the expanse and separated the waters which were below the expanse from the waters which were above the expanse. And it was so. God called the expanse of heaven, and there was evening, and there was morning, and the second day. And God said, "Let the waters below the heavens be gathered into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the gathering of waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees on the earth, bearing fruit after their kind, with seed in them." And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed after their kind, and trees bearing fruit with seed in them after their kind. And God saw that it was good. There was evening and there was morning on the third day. Then God said, let there be lights in the expanse of heaven to separate the day from night. Let them be for signs, for seasons, for days and years. Let there be light for in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth. And it was so. And God made two great lights, the greater light to govern the day, and the lesser light to govern the night. And he made the stars also. God placed them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth. So, as we can see, Elohim is starting the narrative, and he's establishing that he himself, through his spirit, has established control over the heavens, the seas, the waters, the earth, the luminaries, the sun, the moon. And this is a very important statement, not only right now, but remember, Israel is the one that has to meditate on this instruction and in this message by Elohim, because other nations had creation narratives, and they were based on many gods, and these gods fought for power, and they controlled the heavens and the earth, and they were worshipped by different many gods. Egypt himself depended on the sun being eaten by a cat or a snake. I don't know exactly, because I'm not really, or have not read it to detail, but that was their mentality. The sun was eaten by the moon was eaten by the sun, and etc., etc. And this imagination that they had was what triggered their lifestyle. This is what they live for and live by. So Elohim is establishing, I created everything. And not only did I create everything, but I gave it a specific function for its purpose. Nobody is to change that. Why? Because he created it himself. Okay? Now, it is interesting because we're going to go into the PowerPoint and we're going to dive in a little deeper into this. Okay? So, BERESHIT. Torah portion in the beginning. Genesis 1, verse 1 through chapter 6, verse 8. The Haftarah portion, or the prophet portion, is chapter 42, verse 5 to chapter 43, verse 10. And the Brit Hadashah portion is John, chapter 1, verse 1 through 17. Okay? The story of creation, or cosmology, that opens the book of Genesis differs from all other such accounts that were current among the people of the ancient world. The creation narrative lacks interest in the realm of heaven and its economy of words in depicting primeval chaos are highly uncharacteristic of this genre of literature. And this is when I said that they were focusing on the chaos and what happened in the chaos and how did everything come to be. And it's interesting because here the word for deep, which is tehom, refers to a primordial and primeval seas. In the creation period, it covered everything. In creation, it was pushed out to the edges of the cosmos, where it was restrained by God's power. So God here establishes that he created the seas. And it's important because nations around Israel believed that the seas were untamable and it was chaos and nobody can tame the seas, right? And God himself says, not only I can tame the seas, but I created it and I separated it and I gave it a function. And so this is why it's very important, like in the New Testament, for example, when Yeshua himself walks on water, the message is that God has sent his messenger who can control the chaos in the world. So it's very interesting, okay? Now, the creation narrative in Genesis deals directly with what lies beneath the celestial realm, meaning the function of the creation elements. The 6 days of creation, right? So this, I took it from the JPS Torah commentary, and it divides the days of creation in 2 groups. The groups of creation, which are group 1, the resource, which was the light, sky, living terrestrial waters, and dry land, and vegetation, which it classifies them as lowest forms of organic life. Then group 2, the utilizers, that utilize the first 3 elements, the luminaries, fish and fowl, land creatures, and humankind, which are designated as highest forms of organic life. Okay, so this is what God, in the order that God established creation, understanding that there are many gods who control many elements of creation. God created all the elements, and he established not only their creation but their function, and they work according to what he established in the beginning. Okay, this is very important because the Sweets of Sukkot had taught that Israel depended on rain, they depended on the vegetation so that they can bring the first fruits not only to Sukkot but to Pesach, to Shavuot, right? So God is establishing through Israel and letting them know, I in the beginning established a specific order. If you follow that order and you maintain the land, it will give you fruit. Okay? In the beginning is when God established this order and how it will work. Creation and cosmology are familiar topics in a number of different sources of texts, but especially in the mythological literature of the ancient world. Few texts, maybe none, can actually be called creation texts, but they nevertheless provide considerable information concerning ancient beliefs. And so you can look this up in the literature for Egypt, right? And they would explain to you how chaos was in the beginning in their creation, the same with Mesopotamia and every other nation that had a creation narrative and story. Okay? Egypt, the Memphite theology, focusing on the god Ptah, is known for a single copy dated about 700 BC, though it was believed to have originated in the 13th century. At the latest, texts are found in an afterlife literature, pyramid texts or coffin texts or Book of the Dead. So these are the where you can find these elements, okay? From Heliopolis featuring Atum and Heliopolis featuring Amun. Allusions also occurred in wisdom pieces such as the instructions of Merikare, cosmological depictions such as those found in the cenotaphs of Seti I in the 13th century can also be instructive. So those are documentations that would explain and establish their cosmological explanation for the Egyptians and the creation of the world, okay? The Epic of Artaxerxes, the 17th century, Mesopotamia, contains an account of the creation of men. And Munayalish, in the 12th century, at the latest, is the most important ancient text for cosmology. The Eridu Genesis is a Sumerian text copy from about 16 BCE, and it's very interesting how similar this Eridu Genesis is to what we see in our creation. The only difference is that there is one God who has created everything. Okay? Now, many other Sumerian texts contain statements about creation, from myths or rituals to disputation texts or didactory inscriptions, and including even genealogical lists of the gods. Traditions from Nippur feature Enlil, and traditions from Eridu feature Enki, right? So this is what I'm talking about when their creation narratives are based on not only gods, but those gods having other gods that control the chaos. And this is where the elements of worshiping the sky, worshiping the sun, etc., comes into being, because they're trying to find an answer to how things came to be, right? And the beautiful thing about Genesis or BERESHIT is that God lets us know he himself did it. And we follow the function of everything, and we will be placed correctly in order. When people in the ancient world thought about the shape of the cosmos, they thought in far different terms than we do today. It does not surprise us to see that they thought of the sun moving across the sky rather than the earth rotating, revolving around the sun. Likewise, the recognition that the earth is a globe rather than a flat surface is relatively recent development. But the cosmic geography of the ancient world expressed a system that involved much more than a flat earth and a moving sun. As we might expect, their cosmic geography was the result of two influences: the perspective of observation and the beliefs of the roles of the gods in the cosmos. Okay, so this is what they were going based on in their descriptions of their documents, right? What they can see and what they can interpret through their gods, technically, that they had created. This is an image of how they would see, especially Israelites, right? Israelites thought about the world in a term similar to those of cultures around them. The terminology of the Old Testament reflects this cosmic geography, and discussions of creation are based on this understanding. The image that I have here depicts a modern artistic reconstruction of an ancient Israelite view of the cosmos, the sky, supported by mountains in the edges. And it's very interesting because in the ancient Near East, mountains, and even today, we understand that Mount Zion, right, where the temple will be established, it is a high mountain. And they believe that these mountains held the sky. And it was also believed that the mountains were the portal to the heavens. Okay? And so the picture, I chose it and I put the little arrow in the circle because what this image tells us is, well, it tells us a lot. You see the sea monsters and how the earth was held by pillars down here. But besides that, one of the things that I want you to focus on is how the reflection of the heavens is transmitted to the earth. Okay? And this is an element that God is establishing in BERESHIT. God is telling us, I, in the beginning, had a design from the heavens. Okay? And I brought it to creation. And now, what do I want you to do? Heavens has come to earth. Eat it. I want you to maintain it. But we'll continue this. We're going to focus on the temple part, right? Because last year we spoke about everything in the book of Genesis, especially chapter 1, has a name and a function, and it works hand with what God established, okay? But after the 6 days are complete with man and his function, we see the seventh day. And it says, the temple and the cosmos. On the seventh day, he rested, right? Chapter 2 says that, verse 2. The concept of divine rest is prominent in ancient Near East literature. Deities rest and achieved a temple, generally as a result of order having been established. The rest, while it represented disengagement from any process of establishing order, whether through conflict with other deities, and this is what this section right here is where the other nations fell upon, whether through conflict with other deities or not, is more importantly an expression of engagement as the deity takes his place at the helm to maintain an ordered, secure, and stable cosmos. So as God established everything in Genesis 1, Genesis 2, this opens up saying that God sits down on his throne because he had already put everything in motion. He had delegated his purpose through creation. And man was the prince, if you want to say it, or the priest in that moment, in that temple, or the king, or the prince in the kingdom that God had already made for men, right? And the image of Elohim was man in the Eden, in the garden. And he was supposed to rest and reign with God and represent God. How? Following the structure that God established. Okay? Now, the temple on earth was considered only a type of the larger, like I show you in the picture, archetypical cosmic temple. There are many images and symbols that evoke the relationship between temple and cosmos. The temple was considered the center of the cosmos in itself, a microcosm. The Shabbat. And this is where it gets interesting because after creation is established, 6 days, seventh day, God reigns over creation. Man itself is called to represent God. The ascending order of creation and the 6 days plus one literal pattern determines the seventh day as the climax moment. Man is indeed the pinnacle of creation because man is the image. God made man to give name to vegetation, to animal, okay? So God, man becomes God on earth, an image of him in his likeness. But central to the cosmogonic drama is the work of God. He is the solo performer. And this is where every other creation narrative breaks apart. Because men had to understand the following. Not by their power, everything was created. They were just a piece. It may be a very important piece, but they were a piece in creation. And as long as they understood that in the kingdom of Israel, then Elohim will be able to minister to them. Okay? But as long as they disobeyed, they wouldn't be able to understand this. And this was Adam's first responsibility. Maintain the garden. I created all of this. Even you. The seventh day is the Lord's day, through which all the creativity of the preceding days achieves fulfillment. This is where the command comes later on, Exodus 20, verse 8 through 11. Remember the Shabbat day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Shabbat to the Lord, your God. In it you shall do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male or your female, servant or cattle or your sojourner who stays within you. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Shabbat day and made it holy. And this is an incredible statement, because God is telling men, telling Israel, I control chaos. While other nations are afraid of chaos, are afraid of their deities, I am the only true God who created everything. And you, by keeping the Shabbat day holy and reigning with me, will proclaim to the world that not only I am in control of the chaos, but you will be an image of God controlling chaos in the world, meaning you are falling back in the order that God established. God blessed the seventh day and declared it holy, right? So this is from creation. And this is not a dogmatic or religious doctrine. It's just plain fact. You believe in the Bible, then Shabbat is established and declared by God from the beginning. It's holy, separated. Now you're called to separate it with him, be his image in the world. Okay? The day becomes inspired with an extraordinary vital power that communicates itself in a beneficial way. That is why the routine day formula is left out. So that's why you don't do your normal routine life on Shabbat. You cut that out because you're called to make it holy. You reign. You worship God. You teach or you learn from God, and you prepare your congregation or your family for their next 6 days in creation. They're called to be elevated every week. Why? Because you're called to be light to the nations. How you become light to the nations? Understanding God's order and structure. There is chaos in the world. It won't change until there is light in the world representing that in the middle of chaos, there is positive things happening. Through this weekly suspension of normal human activity, man imitates the divine pattern and reactualizes the original sacred time of God, thereby recovering the sacred dimension of existence. And this is very interesting because as you keep Shabbat, you say there is a true God and there is a true order that goes against what creation or what humanity establishes, okay? And you yourself are an intricate piece of saying, I am trying to establish God's order, and by doing that, you keep Shabbat. Man also is able to rediscover his own very human dimension. And how is that? Right? His earthliness. For Shabbat determines the limits man can act in accordance to objective morality. Meaning that in Shabbat, as you stop and control what the world tells you that you have to do, God communicates himself to you and lets you know what is your design, because he created you. As you can understand, in the beginning, right, God created men in the 6th day. So the only one that knows how your life is according to go is God. And on Shabbat, you learn that, whether by teaching, by worship, by studying yourself and your family. The only way that does it is if you prepare them, if you teach them. So one day, man gives up his creative freedom and declares that on that day, each week, nature is inviolable, meaning that it's never to be broken, infringe, or dishonor. And this is where it is very important for us to understand that this is where Adam and every other narrative that we'll follow in the book of BERESHIT came apart, because the order that was established was dishonor. God dressed Adam and Eve with garments of honor. They had a function, they had a purpose, and they were instructed to do a specific task. And so they disobeyed because the serpent enticed them to, or because they desire to do their own will, because they still had a choice and they made choices that got them away from God's covering. And this is understanding the blueprint. God created everything. The thought that the serpent gave Eve and that Adam adopted himself is that you can be like the creator. And there is the problem. You can know so much that you can be like him. And there they were tempted. They forgot that the structure that was established, the creation, was God's. God created everything. And so for us, he gave us the seventh day as a commandment to understand that we keep it holy. And the Shabbat is what we have now. Why? Because it's what gives us the blueprint to God's kingdom. How he morally wants us to live. How he morally wants us to establish our families for the generations to come. Our lives are sanctified by us sanctifying the Shabbat and being obedient, and obviously obeying every other commandment that is established for us to obey in the time and space that we live in. But when we celebrate Shabbat, we understand that and we proclaim that God created the heavens and the earth and gave everything its function, that everything that exists is his, and that he is the sole provider of everything that we have. And that is a message that goes against what the world proclaims. In the world, you would hear that you have the power to do everything and you have the power to create. And even though you do have the power to create, the only reason why you are able to create is because there is a creator. There is a higher purpose. There is a higher entity that you will never be able to match. And so, what do I want to establish by this teaching is that as we enter this biblical cycle, the important key element that we have to understand is, how do we honor God? How do we seek God's kingdom and his purpose? What does he want? Because that's what's going to differentiate this biblical cycle. That's what's going to differentiate your understanding. What does he want? So, with that being said, I hope you enjoyed this opening to what might be a great and amazing year. And hopefully we're able to elevate ourselves, grow, and get closer to what Elohim desires from us as a kingdom, unified to represent his will, his light, and to honor his son, Yeshua HaMessiah. I hope you guys have a great week. Shavua Tov and Shabbat Shalom. Thank you.